This is Land of Havilah, Jeremiah 10. The summary of the first 16 verses is, Please Israel, let it be known to you that Yahweh is the one and only. He's completely unlike the idols, not even to be compared to them. Verse 1. Hear the word which Yahweh speaks to you, house of Israel. Yahweh says, Don't learn the way of the nations, and don't be dismayed at the signs of the sky, for the nations are dismayed at them. For the customs of the peoples are vanity, for one cuts a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers so that it can't move. They're like a palm tree of turned work and don't speak. They must be carried because they can't move. Don't be afraid of them, for they can't do evil, neither is it in them to do good. There's none like you, Yahweh. You're great, and your name is great in might. Who shouldn't fear you, King of the nations? For it belongs to you. Because among all the wise men of the nations and all their royal estate, there's no one like you. But they are together brutish and foolish, instructed by idols. It's just wood. There's silver beaten into plates, which is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz, the work of the engraver and of the hands of the goldsmith. Their clothing is blue and purple. They're all the work of skillful men. But Yahweh is the true God. He's the living God and an everlasting King. At his wrath the earth trembles. The nations aren't able to withstand his indignation. You shall say this to them, The gods that have not made the heavens and the earth will perish from the earth and from under the heavens. God has made the earth by his power. He has established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding he has stretched out the heavens. When he utters his voice, the waters in the heavens roar, and he causes the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He makes lightnings for the rain and brings the wind out of his treasuries. Every man has become brutish and without knowledge. Every goldsmith is disappointed by his engraved image, for his molten image is falsehood, and there's no breath in them. Their vanity, a work of delusion. In the time of their visitation they'll perish. The portion of Jacob is not like these, for he's the maker of all things, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. Yahweh of armies is his name. Comment in verse 1, Israel, hear this from Yahweh. In verse 2, the word from Yahweh begins. He says, Don't be dismayed at the signs of the sky, which means don't put any stock in astrology. Pay no attention to the alignment of the stars and planets, to eclipses, or anything else in the sky. There's nothing there to help you with prognostications. The Gentile nations pay attention to all this, but in verse 3, their customs and beliefs are vain. They're empty. They're worthless. It's a bunch of ado about nothing. The nations get no benefit from astrology, or either, by the way, from their idols. In verses 3 and 4, the idols are made by hand from materials of the earth, for crying out loud. They have to fasten them to the floor with nails so they don't fall over. In verse 5, translations vary. Our translation says the idols are like a palm tree of turned work. Another translation says the idols are like a rounded post. Other translations say the idols are like a scarecrow in a cucumber field. The common idea is that the idols stand upright, and as the verse goes on, the idols don't speak. They have to be carried because they can't move, and don't be afraid of them because they can neither help you or harm you or do anything at all. In verse 6, there's no one like you, Yahweh. In verse 7, you're the one who should be universally feared. In verse 8, the nations are senseless. They're foolish to take their instruction from wooden idols. In verse 9, they make their idols fancy and expensive. Expert craftsmen make them from imported silver and gold. They put blue and purple clothing on their idols. But in verse 10, Yahweh is the true and living God, the everlasting King. When he's angry, watch out. He makes the earth tremble. He wipes out nations. In verse 11, Yahweh says, The gods that have not made the heavens and earth will perish from the earth and from under the heavens. In verse 12, Yahweh made the heavens and earth by his power, wisdom, and understanding. In verse 13, when Yahweh speaks, the waters in the heavens roar, which means he can command rain so heavy that there's a roaring outside. He's also responsible for the quiet rising of the vapors from the earth and for lightning and wind. The point is that Yahweh isn't a man-made, powerless piece of wood plated with gold and silver, dressed up in blue and purple, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do either good or evil, who has to be nailed down to the floor to keep him steady. Yahweh wasn't made. In fact, in a complete turnaround of the concept, he's the maker in verse 12. He makes or breaks as he pleases. In verse 14, every man who puts stock in an idol is brutish, which means senseless. The idols are false. There's no breath in them. In verse 15, the idols are a delusion in the time of their visitation, which means when Yahweh pays the idols a visit, they'll perish. This coincides with 2 Peter 3:10-12, that a day is coming when God will destroy the present universe with fervent heat, down to destruction of the very elements. The idols will burn on that day along with everything else. In verse 16, Jacob is the nation Israel, Genesis 32:28. Yahweh is, quote, the portion of Jacob, end quote, meaning God is all Israel needs, all Israel wants, and all Israel will ever have, Psalm 27:4. And in verse 16, Yahweh of armies is his name. The Hebrew behind Yahweh of armies is Yahweh Sabaoth. It's usually translated Lord of hosts. Sabaoth means mass of people organized for war. So if we stretch it out, it's Yahweh, commander of a host of men organized for war. And the term also reminds us that Yahweh commands hosts of angels, Matthew 26:53. He's the maker of all things in verse 16. Why would anyone want to trade him for wood, silver, or gold? Israel is the tribe of his inheritance in verse 16. It works both ways. God is Israel's forever, and Israel is God's forever. That doesn't mean God will keep all Israel forever. He said many in Israel would be cut off, Isaiah 9:14. But God will preserve and keep a remnant of Israel forever. Now, because Israel has been ignoring all this, choosing to recognize idols but not Yahweh, verse 17, gather up your wares out of the land, you who live under siege. Comment in verse 17, pack up your stuff, call the moving van, so to speak, because Yahweh is removing you from this land. You'll be besieged and displaced from here, verse 18. For Yahweh says, behold, I'll sling out the inhabitants of the land at this time, and will distress them that they may feel it. Comment, the people will feel it. Yahweh will carry out this operation without anesthesia. They're going to feel all the pain of it. The people will say, verse 19, woe is me because of my injury. My wound is serious, but I said, truly this is my grief, and I must bear it. Comment, the injury will be from war, siege, starvation, and deportation. The wound to the nation will be serious, but the people must bear it. Israel as a whole will say, verse 20, my tent has been destroyed, and all my cords are broken. My children have gone away from me, and they are no more. There's no one to spread my tent anymore, to set up my curtains. Comment in verse 20, the children of the land are the people who live there. The land is about to lose her people, or as the verse puts it, the tent is about to lose her children. Some of the land's children will be no more, which means they'll die, and the rest will go away from her, which means the ones who escape death will be deported. The land will be left bereaved. Verse 21. For the shepherds have become brutish and have not inquired of Yahweh. Therefore they have not prospered, and all their flocks have scattered. Comment, the shepherds are the kings, priests, teachers, and all the influential class. They've all become brutish, which means their thinking is on the level of an animal. This explains why the nation hasn't prospered and why the people will be scattered. It all goes back to Israel behaving as the nations in the first part of the chapter and not recognizing the God of creation, verse 22. The voice of news, behold, it comes, and a great commotion out of the north country, to make the cities of Judah a desolation, a dwelling place of jackals. Comment, soon they'll hear the news that armies are approaching from the north. When it's all over, the cities of Judah will be a dwelling place of jackals, meaning the cities will be empty of people and a habitation for wild animals. Wild animals will roam the streets with no one to run them off. verse 23. Yahweh, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It's not in man who walks to direct his steps. Comment, the way of a man is not in himself, which means men are clueless how to live. They walk, but along with that, they need to know how to direct their steps. It's a situation that obviously requires help, since men can walk but don't know which way to go. They don't know what to make of life or the world around them. They're a pitiful race. In themselves, they're not enough. They don't have what it takes. They need Yahweh to show them the way. Someone who's on the right track says, verse 24, Yahweh, correct me, but gently, not in your anger, lest you reduce me to nothing. Comment, that's a fine prayer for anyone, but in the context, it's a prayer for Israel, that God would go easy on them in the coming correction. Now another prayer, verse 25. Pour out your wrath on the nations that don't know you, and on the families that don't call on your name, for they've devoured Jacob, yes, they've devoured him, consumed him, and have laid waste his habitation. Comment, it would be hypocritical and inappropriate for anyone to ask Yahweh to treat him gently in verse 24, then to turn around in the next verse and ask Yahweh to pour out his wrath on his neighbor. If anyone knows he's lost and wants Yahweh to show him the way, it's required of him that he should pray for Yahweh to go easy on his fellow man and show them the way, Matthew 5:44. To justify the prayer of vengeance in verse 25 would have to say it came from the Holy Spirit, which would take the man completely out of it. It was the prophet speaking by the Holy Spirit. If this book was Jeremiah speaking for himself, we wouldn't even take the time to read it. Jeremiah 11 is next.